Welcome back to Ladies Bible Study, ladies. It's a gray, dreary, rainy day here in Missouri. But, it kind of signals the close of summer. We have a few more weeks left of summer, about a month, I guess, until the first day of fall. But we're going to have some days like this. I'm actually thankful for the rain because we have not had much. And when I was sick a couple of weeks ago, my little bucket garden just kind of went to pieces and everything is getting kind of dried up. I think it gave me 4 little tomatoes and a few jalapenos, and my buckets with the potatoes might have potatoes in them, so I'll be anxious to see what that yields. But it's kind of sad. My little bucket garden was an experiment and it kind of flopped on me, but we do need the rain, and I'm glad to see the grass greening back up. It was so dried up and yucky looking. We are just a week away from our ladies' clothing swap. So this, you ladies that are in the church, I hope that you're setting aside your clothes, your shoes, things that you don't wear anymore, maybe some of your household items, or maybe kids' clothes or shoes or boots, things like that, coats. And so we did this. I don't know if we did it last year because of COVID, but the year before we did, and it was a huge success. So we're going to try it again. And this time I'm opening it up to household items. And so because of the price, the cost of things like clothing and food and gas and school supplies, things like that, money is tight for people. And so I put a thing in the bulletin on Sunday that said, don't shop, swap. And so as many ladies as I can get to get involved in it will come and bring those items, and we'll just have a good time. And their entrance fee to join the swap is 6 items of ladies' clothing. That's their entrance fee to be able to join. So I'm looking forward to it. That's going to take place next Tuesday. And I don't really want to bring a whole bunch of stuff back home, but my goal is to get rid of stuff out of the house. And so whatever doesn't get taken at the swap will get put right in the car and taken right to the thrift store. It's not coming back in here, with the exception of things that they could use in our friendship ministry, which is our homeless outreach. I know a lot of ladies that end up with things left over are planning on giving those to that ministry. So that'll be a big blessing too. But I know the ladies are excited about not having to spend money. Just come in and trade your stuff. So if you've never done one, you totally should. They are a blast. And so throughout the night, I asked the ladies to bring appetizers, so we'll have little snacks, they can partake of whenever they want. But throughout the night, when the ladies come in, they'll all get a ticket number, and throughout the night we'll draw numbers from a basket and just give away random prizes. And last year I think we gave away like organization things, little baskets and organizing containers and things like that. So my daughters helped me with that, and I'll put them to work on that again. But I'm looking forward to it. But today we are finishing up the second half of our lesson on Eve. We got through number 8, and I'm going to pick it right up with number 9 and try to get this lesson finished. Some of these questions, I feel like I maybe chased some rabbits down, but we're going to do our best to get through this lesson today. So thanks for joining me. If this is your first time, I hope you'll take a minute and introduce yourself, and maybe jot me a message down in the underneath the description box. Put in the comment who you are, how you found the Bible study, or whatever. And if you want to receive the study notes, I'd be happy to send those to you. Just jot me an email. It'll be down in the description box, and I'll be happy to add you to my mailing list. Don't forget to give me your email address, though, because I can't send them unless I have that. But picking up with the second half of our lesson, we're on number 9, and we're in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, but mostly chapter 3 today. So we'll pick it right up with the question, which is, what was the result of sin upon the woman? Last week we ended with number 8, which was name the ways that Adam sinned. And then, so today, what was the result of sin upon the woman? If you missed last week's lesson, take a day and get caught up and go back and listen to that. Helps me not to have to do a review from last week. Helps me with the time on each Bible study lesson if I don't have to go back and review. But number 9, what was the result of sin upon the woman? And first of all, that she would bring forth children in sorrow. And having children is a joyous occasion. It brings a lot of joy and happiness and just everything wonderful and new that we have. I think we have 8 ladies in our church right now that are expecting babies. And so by the end of the year and even the beginning of next year, we're going to have so many babies in our nursery. I think it's like 8 ladies. So that's exciting, all these babies coming. And so it can be a joyous occasion. And yes, they are the heritage of the Lord, and we know that. But let's face it, there's a lot of sorrow surrounding the birth and the raising of children. There just is. First of all, it's painful to deliver and carry a child, isn't it? Especially when you get into that last trimester. Everything starts shifting, things start changing in your body, because you're trying to make room for this little human that's growing within you. And wow, your bladder says, oh, I'm going this often now. Okay. And as your uterus grows and pushes up and out of the pelvic cavity, the rest of your organs, they kind of become displaced and squished. I know it sounds awful, but any of you that have had a baby, you know this is true. Um, and so by the 3rd trimester, your organs look like they're performing some sort of a sideshow contortion act. As your liver and your lungs, they get squeezed by your stomach and your intestines, both of which used to be several inches lower, contributing to that out of breath feeling that you get so often right around week 31 or so. And we won't even mention the walk/waddle that takes place towards the end there. And every time you stand up, it just feels like everything is like moving downward, and there's so much pressure. It's very uncomfortable towards the end, especially when you're carrying a baby. And I remember my last baby, which was Hannah, who's 37 now, but she was a stretcher. And I would be sitting in my chair, just minding my own business, having a, good afternoon or whatever, just taking a break or resting or whatever. And I had 2 little ones playing around at my feet there, but Hannah was a stretcher. And so when she would get to stretching, boy, I was on my feet just like that, standing up, giving that baby room to stretch out, because wow, that hurt. I don't know if you've ever had a baby that was like that, but she was a stretcher. And it was kind of funny because, when most babies are born, you like to swaddle them, they look like a little peanut all wrapped up in this little blanket and everything, and we tried that with Hannah, but I'm not kidding you, within minutes, both arms were sticking straight out the top of the blanket. and before long, both of her legs would be like straight out the bottom of it. She did not like to be swaddled. And we often joked about it, because one of the funniest things I ever saw was this little tiny newborn baby with her legs straight as a board standing on my lap. That was Hannah. But she that was painful, that last trimester with her. Second of all, that her desire would be to her husband, meaning that he would be an authority to rule over her. And so that's God's words, not mine. That was what God said. I didn't just make that up. So if you have a problem with the ruling part, then I would say, rather than take offense or get angry about that, just take it to the Lord and ask him to help you with that. Ask him to help you think biblically and right about that. And we know that anything with 2 heads is really a monster, isn't it? And it's the same in the home. There's one head. That's what makes the home operate smoothly, is when there's one head. And while, yes, he did create us to be equal, and we're commanded to prefer one another in honor, we're supposed to do that, the hierarchy of the home was God's design. In 1 Corinthians 14:40, it says, let all things be done decently and in order. So we see what God thinks about that. And while I know that that's dealing with issues within the church, I also believe that God intends that mindset for the home. That's his idea, that things be done decently and in order. And I could read that passage in 1 Corinthians and know it's dealing with church issues, but I would think, I bet God wants that everywhere, things to be done decently in order, not just in the home, but also in my personal life, in my walk with him. And so when we get outside of God's will for our proper roles, things no longer are in order. It's confusion. And in that same passage in 1 Corinthians, it says that God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. And again, it's dealing with the church setting, but this could also apply to our homes and to our walk with the Lord, our personal life. God's not pleased, and his will and his word are not forwarded when our homes are utter confusion and full of strife. God's not pleased with that at all. And if God is not the author of confusion, who is? It comes from beneath. It's from the devil. And if your home seems full of it, then just remind yourself who the author of that confusion really is, and realize where the fight is coming from, and do battle with him and not your spouse. Your spouse is not your enemy. It's the devil. So arm yourself with your spiritual battle, and rather than you fighting it, let God fight your battle for you. Number 10 says, how did the curse relate to the various role areas? And you may have something different. I'd love it if you'd share your answers, either in the comment section or jot me an email or whatever. But I just put down that the man would have to work by the sweat of his brow, because we know that's true. And now, whereas before in the garden things probably just grew with relative ease, now it's work. He gets tired. He sweats. He gets fatigued trying to make anything happen now as a major production. Things became much more difficult to accomplish. And I'm sure the word weary or fatigue probably had a whole new meaning. And for the woman, of course, we know she was given a head and placed under the authority of the man. And I was thinking the other day when I was studying at first for the first half of the lesson, that I talked about how that when they sinned, their eyes were opened, and the things they saw, the thoughts that flooded their heart and mind after they sinned, it was all so different, everything that they saw. But can you imagine once they were cast out of the garden, and now they were in this land that they'd never seen before? It didn't look like the garden, I'm sure of it. This land had to be worked to make things grow. This land, probably things died or dried up, or had to have water to grow, or had to be tilled. There were weeds, nasty weeds. Those weeds didn't grow in the garden. What are these? These things are thorny and prickly, and they hurt, or these are hard to get out of the ground. Just weeds. It's hard to grow a garden in this new land. Imagine the burning heat of the afternoon sun. I don't think they had to deal with that in the garden. Tears of regret over what they had done, over both of their decisions. There was probably a lot of regret, thoughts that flooded their mind about each other. I don't think they had thoughts like that in the garden about each other. Maybe he thought when he looked at her, as he's out there in the garden sweating, trying to make things grow, he probably, and they were made of the same flesh we are, but maybe he thought, man, if she just would have listened, if she just would have obeyed. I told her what God said. If she just would have obeyed. Can you imagine him having thoughts about her, this beautiful, perfect woman that God created and brought to him? Now he has these thoughts about her. And maybe she looked at him and thought, this is his fault. If he would have just led me better, if he would have just tried to help me, I can imagine, because I know the conflicts between men and women and what they think about each other. But they probably had these thoughts they'd never had about each other before. And they weren't thoughts that they had before the curse. Before the curse, they probably looked at each other as utter perfection and this wonderful creation of God, and they had no reason to think ill of each other before the curse. Number 11 says, if the woman was designed by God to be under the protective leadership of the man, how did having a man rule over her become a curse? Well, while the first part of the woman's curse is easily understood, in sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, that's easy to understand. That last part can be hard to understand sometimes. We make it hard, we do. But to try to simplify that a little bit, Eve, now after the curse, will try to usurp her husband's role as head, but God is going to require Adam to put a stop to that, to stop her from doing that. And that's going to result in conflict. It's going to result in some pushback. And secondly, Eve will try to usurp her husband's role as the head, and Adam will have to choose whether he's going to exercise unbiblical male domination over her, or possibly just become very passive about it and think it's not worth the fight. I'll just let her do the leading. There's those two options he could choose there. But at any rate, it's a struggle. It's a battle. And so it was God's design that Adam rule his family appropriately, like he would have done in the garden. But because of the curse and this new sin nature and this will, his wife is going to try to usurp his God-given authority, and he'll be tempted, like I said, to either dominate her or just become very passive about it. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle in almost every marriage, isn't it? Number 12 says, in sorrow, is sorrow in bringing forth children limited to just labor pains at birth? And we know it's not. Any of you that have ever raised children or grandchildren or whatever, you know that it doesn't stop there after the labor and the birth of your children. And I think of the many women who have suffered with miscarriages down through the years and the great sorrow that is part of that. I've watched all three of our children bury little ones, and it's never easy. It's very heartbreaking and just deep, deep heartache for mamas that lose babies. You never intend on that. And many of you listening have suffered that same sorrow. Then there's the sorrow surrounding the sleepless nights that reduce you to tears and frustration. I just want sleep. I'm so tired, which I think contributes to probably a lot of the postpartum depression that ladies suffer with. There's the child that won't nurse, as hard as you try. They just aren't good nursers. And that can become very frustrating. Or maybe that child wants to nurse every 30 minutes. And you're at the point where you literally can't even get a shower, let alone cook dinner or get anything done around the house, because this baby just wants to nurse every 30 minutes. Or maybe you have a baby that just cries incessantly for no reason, and you're frustrated because you don't know what you're doing wrong. Some babies just cry. I remember our second baby, when I had my first one, and he was so laid back, I would have to wake him up to eat. It was a huge sleeper. But he just never cried. He was a very content baby. And I think sometimes when you have that first one, you're just totally hands-on. You're always carrying them, always caring for them, always doing for them. It's your first baby. It's exciting. But then the second one comes along, and if they're close together, and if that second one is different from that first one at all, it can create a lot of frustration in you, and that baby picks up on that. And with our second one, Sarah, the doctor said she had colic, but she wasn't a good nurser, and I was frustrated, and she would just cry and cry at the top of her lungs, and I didn't know what to do for her, and all the older women are saying, oh, give her mint, give her peppermint, it'll help her tummy, it's colic. And some of the what do you call it, tips or tricks or whatever. And I'm not saying don't ask the older women, because the older women are full of wisdom and knowledge about raising babies, but sometimes it's a little different. And so I remember one woman was like, just take a bottle of warm water and crush up a peppermint in the water and let her drink that. It was literally sugar water. So I had a lot of advice like that, but that was so frustrating to have a baby that just cried nonstop. That can cause a lot of tears on your part as well, because you feel like you need to be able to comfort that baby or meet their needs, and when you can't, boy, that's tough. Then there's the child that refuses to learn, once they start growing, or else they have a learning disability that reduces you to a heap of tears that turn into this feeling of, I'm a failure, I can't teach them anything. I don't know how many homeschooling mamas have probably shed tears because they've failed to teach a concept that they think their child ought to be able to pick up. There's the sorrow surrounding a child with a physical disability. I think that one speaks for itself. The sorrow surrounding childhood and adolescent dramas. Any of you that have raised children up into their older years know what that's like. Why dad said no, why Katie won't talk to me anymore, why Alyssa's being mean to me, why my best friends are leaving me out. And, sometimes that happens with boys too. There's the sorrow of losing a child in their youth, they're gone too soon. Or a child in their adulthood even that maybe was lost through a tragic accident. I remember the tears. My mother never, and I would never say a mother should get over the death of a child, but my mother never, she never, the sorrow was just always there, that grief of when my brother died at 28, the sorrow. It never, I don't know how to even say that, you know. It never got any easier. It was just the same, that constant pressure of grief and sorrow that she felt over losing a child. We suffered through the sorrow of a child with cancer, watching her get all bloated and sick from all the meds that they were giving her that were supposed to help her get over it. Many of you may be suffering through the sorrow of a prodigal child. I can't think of probably a heavier sorrow for a parent than to have a child say, I'm going to go do my own thing, while you just sit back feeling helpless and watching. There's the sorrow of saying goodbye to your grown children as they board a plane to relocate in a foreign country. I know what that feels like, especially when there's 5 grandbabies involved. Many of you maybe have children serving the Lord on the foreign field. God bless you. I know how that feels. There's just so much sorrow surrounding birthing and raising our children. And you know, when you look at that list, you think, well, good grief, man, I don't want to have kids if that's all it is, you know. But you know, while I can pick out these specific sorrows that happen in raising children, it's not all that. The blessings and the benefit, the joy, all of that, the fulfillment, all of it outweighs the sorrows, I think anyway, in the raising of a child. What a blessed privilege to be able to raise a child to love and serve the Lord. Number 13 says, in what other ways would motherhood have been different without the sin nature? And I know what you're thinking. All of you immediately were like, well, there wouldn't be any pain involved in childbearing. You know, what would happen before, how would childbirth have been before the curse? Would you just grunt and there's the baby, no pain involved? I can't, you know, I can't even fathom, can you? And I think if there's anything we could be cross with Eve about, it's probably that one, you know. But of course, no sorrow in the birthing and raising of our children. And when you take away the sorrow aspect about having children, it would mean, you know, the opposite of sorrow is joy. So imagine a home that's utter just joy and pleasantness and peace. That's what I would think. That's how it would be different. Who wouldn't want a home like that? That's full of joy and peace. And we can have that. It might not be to the extent of how it would have been in the garden before the curse. It might not be to that extent, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. We shouldn't strive for that goal to have a home that's full of joy and peace. It takes work, it does, but it's rewarding, you know. And you may have days when you fail. Honestly, I've had lots of failed days, you know, where I said something or did something that was silly or stupid, and I upset the balance in our home, and it meant, you know, a day of quietness and tiptoeing around each other and, you know, trying to work through an issue or a disagreement. I take full responsibility for that, you know, and so it's never always all joy and peace, but I feel like the more you work at it, the more your home can be like that. It's all about how much work you want to put into it. And if you, the opposite of having a joyful, peaceful home would be a home that's filled with strife and fighting and arguing and jockeying for position or authority in the home. Who's right? Who's in charge? Who, you know, who calls the shots here? And you don't, that's what we see a lot of today. You don't see a lot of Romans 12:10 homes, which is in honor, preferring one another. If we operated our homes that way, that's a very selfless attitude to have, and that'll put you on the road really quickly to having that joyful, peaceful home that you so desire. It takes work, but you have to follow God's word and his ways to accomplish it. Number 14 says, how is your attitude and example affecting those in leadership over you? And so I immediately think of my husband. He's my husband, but he's also my pastor. So he's my head in 2 different ways, you know. And so my life, my words, my actions, attitudes, all of that, it has the propensity to not only just ruin his day, but his ministry in my life, because my husband's a pastor, has a propensity to ruin his ministry.